There are memories I wish I could erase, yet they cling to me like shadows, following me even into the quiet halls of the convent. Silence was once my only protection, a fragile shield I built around my heart to survive. For decades, I told no one the truth, not even those who tried to love me most. But I have come to believe that silence, while it can protect for a time, eventually becomes its own prison. And today, for reasons I can only call God's will, I will unlock that prison and let my story breathe. From the outside, you would see only a nun in her habit, someone whose life is ordered by prayer, discipline, and compassion. That is who I am now. But before I ever belonged to the church, I was simply a little girl in a small American town, a girl who thought her family would always be her refuge. I believed that love inside a household was unshakable, that those bound to you by blood were also bound by loyalty. I could not have imagined how wrong I would be. If you met me years ago, you might have thought I was quiet, maybe even shy. What you would not have known was that my silence came from fear. Behind every lowered gaze and cautious smile, I was hiding secrets I was too terrified to reveal. I lived in constant dread, never knowing when the next storm would break inside the walls of my own home. That dread became my daily companion, and it shaped me in ways I am still discovering even now, so many decades later. I will not begin with the most painful part yet. To understand what was lost, you must first understand what once was. My father was a man who worked hard with his hands, often gone for days driving trucks across state lines. When he was home, he carried me on his shoulders and called me his little girl. My mother sewed dresses for wealthy families, her fingers forever pricked with needles, her eyes weary from long nights by the lamp. We were not rich, but we had enough to eat, and in the eyes of the town, we were ordinary. Ordinary, that is, until the truth inside our walls broke us beyond repair. I had brothers, older than me, louder than me, boys who filled the house with teasing and noise. As the youngest, I was expected to look up to them. Instead, I learned fear in their presence. The same voices that once laughed at my school recitals would one day whisper threats in my ear. The same hands that once lifted me high would become the reason I began locking my door at night. And yet, for so long, I told no one. Because who would believe that a daughter's worst enemies could be her own brothers? It is difficult to put into words the kind of silence that follows betrayal. It is not the silence of peace or of rest. It is the silence of being trapped, of swallowing words until they burn in your throat. Every time I thought of telling someone, a wave of fear crushed me. What if they called me a liar? What if my mother turned against me? What if my father, my only source of safety, refused to believe me? Those questions built chains around my tongue. So I said nothing, but saying nothing does not mean feeling nothing. The silence was filled with pain, confusion, and a sense that I must have done something to deserve it. Children are quick to blame themselves for things far beyond their control. I thought perhaps I had smiled wrong, dressed wrong, spoken wrong. Perhaps God Himself was punishing me. And so I shrank smaller and smaller until I was almost invisible. I cut my hair short, wore baggy clothes, lowered my voice. I believed if I could disappear, the hurt might disappear with me. But it never did. Looking back now, I see the hand of God was still near me, though at the time I could not feel it. I whispered prayers into the dark, pleading for angels to come, for someone to notice, for anyone to intervene. I remember staring at the ceiling at night, promising myself that if I survived until morning, I would try again to speak the truth. And then morning would come, and with it, fear, and so another day passed in silence. I cannot tell you how many nights I felt utterly abandoned, not just by my family, but even by heaven. Was God watching? Was he deaf to the cries of a frightened girl? The questions gnawed at me, unanswered. And yet, though I doubted his presence, he never truly left me. For if he had, I would not be here today, telling you this story. It may sound strange, but even now, when I close my eyes, I can hear the sounds of that house, the creak of the floorboards, the slam of the screen door, the laughter that chilled me more than silence. Those sounds are etched into me, as much a part of my memory as any prayer I later memorized. They remind me of where I began, of what I endured, and of why my path eventually led me to the convent. My name, though I reveal it only now, is Patricia Alden. When people ask why I chose this life, why I walked away from everything the world offers, they expect an answer about devotion or calling. And yes, devotion is part of it. But beneath that, deeper and truer, is this. The church became the only place that opened its doors when my family had turned against me. The church became the family I had lost, the arms that did not betray, the sanctuary I could not find at home. In telling you this, I know I open old wounds, but I believe wounds exposed to the light are the only ones that can heal. My story is not only about tragedy. It is about endurance, about the God who sustained me even when I thought he had abandoned me, about the way a shattered childhood led me toward a life of service. This is not easy for me to say, but it must be said. When those who should have loved me most became the source of my deepest pain, I thought my life was over. And yet, in the wreckage, I found something stronger than despair. I found a doorway I never expected, the doorway of faith. Before I can tell you how my life began to unravel, I must take you back to the time before it all changed. I want you to see the little girl I once was, to know the world that shaped me before it collapsed. Because for a brief season, I lived in innocence, believing in the goodness of those around me, trusting that my family would always be my shield. Those memories are bittersweet now, like faded photographs that hold both comfort and sorrow. I grew up in a modest home in a quiet, American town. The houses on our street were small but neatly kept, with gardens that neighbors tended carefully and porches where families gathered in the evening. Ours was a 3-bedroom house painted pale blue, with a front yard where dandelions seemed to grow faster than my mother could pull them. To me, that house was the whole world, walls filled with laughter, arguments, smells of my mother's cooking, and the steady hum of life as I knew it. My father, George, was a truck driver who spent much of his time on the road. When I was a little girl, I never minded his absences because his returns were full of joy. He always carried sweets in his pocket, the kind of small candies that stuck to the wrapper, and he would place them in my hands as if they were treasures. He lifted me high onto his shoulders, even when I had grown too big, calling me his princess, his voice deep with pride. When he was home, I felt untouchable, wrapped in a cocoon of safety. To me, he was larger than life. My mother, Connie, was different, practical, stern, and always busy. She worked as a seamstress, taking in piles of dresses and shirts from wealthier families. I remember the lines of laundry stretched across our backyard, sheets flapping in the wind like sails. Her hands were always rough from soap and needlework, but her love showed in quieter ways. Meals cooked, clothes mended, prayers whispered before bed. She was not soft in her affection, but she kept our home together when my father was away, and then there were my brothers. Anthony was the eldest, nearly a man when I was still a child. Joseph came next, quieter and more serious. Robert, only a few years older than me, still had the mischievous streak of boyhood. Together, they filled the house with noise, teasing, wrestling, and boasting about their small victories at school or in the neighborhood. As the youngest and only daughter, I was both cherished and teased. They called me little sister in voices that were sometimes affectionate, sometimes mocking. At that age, I could not imagine them as anything other than protectors, even if their jokes sometimes stung. My days were simple. I walked to school with books pressed tightly against my chest, the smell of chalk dust following me from classroom to classroom. I loved to read, disappearing into stories where heroines always found safety and villains were punished. I helped my mother with chores, learning how to fold clothes neatly, how to scrub the floors until they shone. On Sunday mornings, our family, dressed in our best, and walked together to church, my father holding my small hand as the bells rang overhead. Those were the moments that built my faith, even if I did not yet understand how much I would need it. Sometimes I wonder if I have softened those memories in my mind, polishing them until they glow brighter than they truly were. Maybe it is human nature to cling to the good when we know the bad will come. But I do remember genuine laughter, playing in the yard with Robert, skipping rope on the sidewalk, running until my legs ached. I remember my mother braiding my hair by the window, humming softly under her breath. I remember lying in bed at night, the sound of my father's deep voice drifting through the walls as he told stories to my brothers. For those moments, I believed I belonged to a family that would keep me safe forever. And yet, there were shadows even then. My father's absences were growing longer. Each new job seemed to take him farther away, sometimes for weeks at a time. My mother, tired from endless work, grew sharper in her words, quicker to scold. My brothers, too, were changing, stepping into the rough edges of adolescence. Their jokes became crueler, their tempers shorter. At the time, I thought it was just the way boys grew up, loud, restless, impatient. I did not yet understand that those small shifts were warning signs of something darker that I could not see coming. Still, I clung to the good. I remember summer evenings when fireflies lit the yard and my father grilled corn on the cob while my mother brought out lemonade in glass pitchers. I remember Christmas mornings when our house smelled of cinnamon and pine, and I believed that the world outside our walls was as safe as the one inside. These are the memories I treasure, the ones I hold close even now, because they remind me that I once knew joy before I knew fear. I share this not to romanticize the past, but to show the contrast that would follow. For every innocent smile in a photograph, there is a shadow just outside the frame. For every sweet memory of my father's laughter, there is the ache of knowing he was gone too often when I needed him most. For every quiet moment of my mother's care, there is the weight of her exhaustion, the way her eyes sometimes looked past me as if she could not see. As I look back now, I realize that childhood can be both a gift and a fragile illusion. Mine was both. It gave me glimpses of what love should look like, what protection should feel like, even if those glimpses were fleeting. And it also taught me how quickly security can shatter, how swiftly innocence can be taken. The little girl I was did not know what was coming. She only knew that her world felt safe enough, ordinary enough, to believe that nothing could harm her. But life has a way of teaching lessons too soon, and mine was about to change forever. The storm was already gathering on the horizon, though I could not yet see it. And when it came, it would tear through every piece of that childhood, leaving behind a silence so heavy it would take years to break. Childhood has a way of wrapping itself in illusions. Mine was no different. I thought the laughter of my brothers meant loyalty. I thought my mother's stern voice was still rooted in love. I thought my father's long absences were temporary, sacrifices, not cracks in our foundation. But illusions can shatter without warning, and when they do, they cut sharper than glass. I was 13 the first time I realized my home was no longer safe. My father had left for one of his long trips, the kind that stretched into weeks. My mother, tired as always, went out to deliver laundry to one of her clients. That afternoon, I was left in the house with my brothers. The sun was still bright. Through the windows, the air warm with the promise of spring, and yet I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. I remember standing at the sink, washing dishes, the sound of water running, the clink of plates. Then I sensed someone behind me. When I turned, it was Anthony, the eldest. His presence was different that day, closer, heavier, charged with something I could not name but instinctively feared. He spoke words that should never have been spoken by a brother, words that turned my stomach to ice. At first, I thought he was joking, a cruel attempt at humor, but the look in his eyes told me it was not a joke. Before I could move, Joseph entered the room. Relief flickered through me, believing he would stop Anthony. But his smirk, the way his eyes lingered, told me otherwise. Instead of defending me, he seemed complicit. And then Robert appeared, the youngest of the three. I prayed that at least he would be my ally. Yet the look on his face was not one of protection. It was of hesitation, fear, and something darker. That afternoon marked the beginning of my private nightmare. What happened in those moments I cannot describe in detail. I will not. To put it into words would be to relive what I have spent a lifetime learning to endure. What I can tell you is this. The walls of my home, once my shelter, became the walls of a prison. My brothers, who should have stood between me and harm, became the source of it. My childhood ended at that sink, in that kitchen, beneath the weight of their betrayal. When it was over, I lay on the floor, unable to rise. My body trembled, my tears would not stop, and in my ears echoed their warning. If you tell anyone, no one will believe you. They told me I would be called a liar, that even my parents would take their side. I was just a girl, and they were three strong voices united against me. I believed them. In that moment, something inside me broke. Not only my innocence, but my ability to trust that love meant safety. That night, when my mother returned, I said nothing. My eyes were swollen, my body aching. Yet when she asked what was wrong, I whispered only of a headache. How could I tell her? How could I make her understand that her sons, the boys she had nursed and raised, had become my tormentors? The words would not come. Silence, once again, became my only refuge. But silence did not protect me. The next morning, when my mother went to the market, they came again. This time, there was no hesitation, no uncertainty. Anthony pushed open the door to my room as if locks meant nothing. His voice dripped with mockery. This house belongs to all of us, little sister. My resistance was met with cruelty, and my fear became their weapon. From that day on, whenever my mother left the house, I lived in dread. Every absence of my father was like a sentence carried out against me. The torment became systematic, calculated. They knew my mother's schedule, her errands, her deliveries. They knew when my father would be gone for days. They took turns, one keeping watch while the others pressed closer. I lived like a hunted creature inside my own home, scanning corners, holding my breath at every creak of the floorboards. My laughter disappeared. My voice shrank to whispers. My body became thin, hollowed by fear. At school, the changes were noticed. Teachers frowned at my slipping grades. Classmates whispered about my sudden silence, my baggy clothes, my short-cropped hair. They asked what had happened to the once bright and eager girl, but I could not answer. How could I explain that I was trying to vanish, to make myself invisible, hoping that invisibility might equal safety? Guilt took root in me as deeply as fear. Perhaps I had invited it. Perhaps it was my fault. Those lies whispered in my mind each night, echoing the cruel voices of my brothers. I wondered if God Himself was punishing me for something I did not understand. I prayed desperately, begging for deliverance, yet when no rescue came, I questioned whether heaven had abandoned me altogether. The cruelty did not stop with what they did in secret. They twisted words at the dinner table, painting me as untrustworthy in front of my mother. "She flirts with boys," Anthony would say casually as he passed the potatoes. I saw her talking to someone older on the corner. My mother's eyes grew suspicious. Her trust in me eroded little by little, until I felt not only betrayed by my brothers, but distanced from her as well. Their manipulation was complete. They stole my childhood, and they stole my mother's faith in me. I became a shadow of the girl I had been. My steps were hesitant, my smile vanished, and each day bled into the next like an endless nightmare. Yet I said nothing. I convinced myself that if I could just survive until my father returned, I might be safe. My father, who had always been my protector, surely he would know, surely he would see. But even as I longed for him, I feared the truth. If I told him, would he believe me, or would he choose his sons over me? That question held me captive as much as my brothers did. So I stayed silent. Silent through the pain, silent through the fear, silent even as my heart screamed for someone, anyone, to notice. Looking back now, I see that silence was both my shield and my cage. It kept me alive, yes, but it also buried me deeper into despair. I was a child forced to carry a burden no child should bear, and though the walls of that house have long since fallen behind me, their weight lingers still. It was in those years, in those long days of dread and nights of weeping, that the first cracks in my soul formed. They are cracks I still carry, though grace has filled them. And yet, in the mystery of God's plan, those very cracks would one day allow the light to shine through. Silence became my constant companion after those first betrayals. It wrapped around me like a shroud, heavy and suffocating, pressing down until I could barely breathe. I told myself it was safer not to speak. If no words escaped my lips, then there could be no arguments, no disbelief, no further humiliation. But silence, I soon discovered, does not protect. It imprisons. Every day I carried their threats like stones in my pocket. No one will believe you. Mother will side with us. Father will hate you if you speak. Those words replayed in my mind until they seemed like truth. I became terrified of opening my mouth. Even when teachers asked me simple questions, I stumbled over my answers. Even when classmates invited me to join their games, I shook my head. Words had become dangerous, so I surrendered them. At home, my mother's suspicions grew sharper. She noticed my unease, but instead of asking with gentleness, her tone carried accusation. One evening, as I dried the dishes, she said abruptly, "Why do you act so strange lately? Who have you been talking to?" My hands trembled so badly I nearly dropped a plate. I wanted to scream the truth. "It is not someone outside. It is right here. It is your sons who have broken me." But fear knotted my throat. Instead, I whispered, "No one." And she shook her head as if she had caught me in a lie. Her doubt was, another knife. Each suspicious glance confirmed what my brothers had warned. No one would believe me. Slowly, the bond between mother and daughter frayed until I felt like a stranger in her eyes. School offered no escape. Once I had been bright, eager, quick to raise my hand. Now my grades slipped as though knowledge no longer had room in my weary mind. I sat in the back of classrooms, shrinking into myself, hoping teachers would not notice. Whispers began to spread. Why does she look so pale? Why does she never smile? Some children laughed at me when I tripped or dropped books, and though their cruelty was small compared to what I endured at home, it still carved into me. The isolation was complete. I could not trust my brothers. I could not confide in my mother. And I feared overburdening my father, who was away more often than not. Friends at school drifted away as my silence grew heavier. Even God felt distant, his answers slow, his presence faint. Each night I knelt by my bed, whispering prayers into the dark. I asked for deliverance, for someone to see me, for angels to step in. But the room always remained the same, dim, airless, quiet, except for my own sobs muffled into a pillow. My body began to bear the marks of the burden. I lost weight, my face grew hollow, and my once bright eyes dimmed. Clothes that used to fit became too loose, but I wore them anyway, hiding myself beneath fabric as if invisibility could protect me. I cut my hair shorter, thinking maybe if I looked less like a girl, my brothers would lose interest. None of it worked. All it did was make me blend into the shadows, exactly where I felt I belonged. There were moments when the despair nearly drowned me. I remember standing at the top of our staircase one night, the wooden railing cool under my hand. A thought whispered, "If you fall, it will all end." I gripped the railing tighter, shaking with the war inside me. I wanted the pain to stop, yet something deeper, something stubborn, perhaps God-given, kept me from letting go. I stepped back into my room, closed the door, and wept until I could not anymore. Looking back now, I see how dangerous that season was. Silence had not only stolen my voice, it had nearly stolen my will to live. My brothers had broken my trust, but my silence broke my connection to the world. I had no one to lean on, no one to confide in, no one to remind me that I was still loved. My mother's doubt turned into coldness. She scolded me for daydreaming, for failing to complete chores quickly, for looking guilty. Each word of criticism drove me deeper into myself. My father remained distant, often gone, unaware of what was happening in his absence. And my brothers, emboldened by my silence, continued their cruelty with smirks of triumph. In that darkness, I began to believe their lies, that I was worthless, that I deserved no better, that the shame was mine alone to carry. I had been taught that truth sets you free, but in my young heart, truth felt like a locked door. If I opened it, the world would collapse. If I kept it shut, I would collapse instead. So I chose the only path I knew. I stayed silent. silent when my mother asked questions, silent when teachers expressed concern, silent even when the weight grew so heavy I thought I might crumble beneath it. My silence became the mask I wore each day, and soon no one looked past it. I was just the quiet girl, the one who drifted through hallways like a shadow. Yet even in that isolation, a faint ember remained. I cannot explain it except to say that God must have kept it burning. Though I felt abandoned, though I doubted His presence, a small flicker of hope survived inside me. Some nights, after endless tears, I would whisper, "Please, just let someone see." It was not a bold prayer, but it was the only one I had left. And though I could not know it then, those whispered pleas were not in vain. The silence that had caged me would one day crack. My father, who had always called me his little girl, would begin to see the truth hidden in my eyes. And when he did, the fragile walls of secrecy would come crashing down. There is only so much a child can carry before the weight becomes too heavy. Silence may have kept me hidden for a time, but silence cannot heal wounds. It festers instead, turning into sickness of the body as well as the soul. By the time I reached 14, I was no longer simply a frightened girl. I was a shadow of myself, drifting through days with hollow eyes and trembling hands. The breaking point did not arrive suddenly, though to those around me it might have looked that way. It had been building for months, nights without sleep, meals left untouched, an ache in my chest that no prayer seemed to ease. I had grown thin, my skin pale, my hair brittle. Even my teachers noticed. One of them pulled me aside after class, her voice gentle. "Patricia, are you eating? Are you well?" I forced a smile, nodding quickly, and hurried away. The lie left a bitter taste, but the truth was unthinkable. At home, the tension worsened. My mother's suspicion had hardened into near hostility. She accused me of laziness, of lies, of dishonoring the family. Her words stung almost as much as my brother's cruelty. Each glance from her seemed to confirm my deepest fear, that she did not see me as a victim, but as a problem. I wanted to tell her everything, to fall into her arms and beg her to protect me, but the chains of fear kept my lips sealed, and then, one night, my body could no longer hold the weight. I remember the kitchen floor, cool beneath my feet as I washed the last of the dishes. My vision blurred, my hands shook, and before I could steady myself, the world went black. I awoke on the floor with my mother shouting my name, her voice filled not with concern but frustration. "What is wrong with you now?" she demanded, as if fainting were some willful act of defiance. I could not answer. My throat felt raw, my chest tight. She shook her head and muttered something about weakness before dragging me to my bed. But my collapse did not go unnoticed by everyone. My father returned the next evening from one of his long trips, his boots heavy on the porch. As he entered, I was too weak to rise, so I lay in bed as he stepped into my room. The look on his face is one I will never forget. His little girl, once full of life, lay before him thin and pale, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. He knelt beside me, his rough hand resting on my forehead. "Patty," he whispered, his old nickname for me. "What's happened to you?" Tears welled in my eyes, but still I said nothing. My brother's voices echoed in my mind. "He will never believe you. He will hate you if you tell." So I only shook my head, whispering that I was tired. My father frowned, unconvinced. He stayed beside me long into the night, watching me breathe, his jaw tight with worry. The days that followed grew worse. My fainting spells continued, my stomach twisted at the sight of food, and my mother's patience snapped. One afternoon, she shouted at me in front of my brothers, accusing me of bringing shame upon the family with my weakness. My brothers exchanged glances I understood all too well, smirks of victory, as if her anger proved their control over me. That moment nearly broke me completely, but then a shift. My father came home early one evening, finding me curled in a corner of my room, tears soaking the hem of my dress. He lifted me into his arms as though I were still a small child and carried me to the porch where the fading light touched his weathered face. "Patty," he said firmly, "this is not just sickness. Something is wrong. I can see it in your eyes." The truth trembled on my lips, pressing to be spoken. But fear clamped down again. My mouth opened, then closed. I shook my head, unable to form the words. He sighed heavily, but I could see the doubt in his expression. Doubt not of me, but of what he could not yet name. Soon after, my father insisted on taking me to a doctor. My mother protested, saying I was simply dramatic, that girls my age were prone to fits and moods. But my father ignored her. At the clinic, the doctor examined me carefully, frowning at my weight loss, at the bruises I tried to explain away. He asked questions I could not answer. "Are you safe at home? Has anyone hurt you?" My heart pounded so loudly I thought it might give me away, but still I whispered, "I am fine." The lie sat heavy in the air, but the doctor's eyes lingered on me with suspicion. When we returned home, my father grew quieter. He watched me closely, studied the way I flinched when my brothers entered a room, noticed the tension that filled the air when my mother scolded me. He said nothing then, but I could feel his unease growing. For me, the breaking point was not just physical collapse. It was the moment I realized I could no longer keep my secret much longer. My silence was killing me, and my body knew it before. My voice admitted it. Each fainting spell, each hollow stare was my soul crying out for help. I was drowning in a sea of fear, and only the truth could pull me to the surface. But speaking that truth would come at a cost I could barely imagine. My family was already strained, already fragile. If I shattered the illusion of normalcy, what would remain? Would my father stand with me? Or would the threats of my brothers prove true? Those questions haunted me as I lay awake each night, staring at the cracks in the ceiling. I longed for deliverance, yet dreaded the price of it. I prayed more fervently than ever, begging God for strength. And though he did not yet remove the suffering, I believe now he was preparing me for what would come next. Because soon, the silence that had bound me for so long would begin to unravel. My father's doubt would grow into suspicion, and suspicion into anger. And when the truth finally broke free, it would tear through the fragile shell of our family with a force none of us could stop. There are moments in life when silence no longer serves you. For years, I had hidden behind it, convincing myself it was safer to remain unseen, unheard. But silence has a way of unraveling when eyes finally begin to notice what words have concealed. For me, that unraveling began with my father. He had returned from another long trip, wearier than I had ever seen him. His clothes smelled of diesel, his hands rough from endless hours on the road. Yet his eyes, always so steady, now carried a sharpness, as if he were searching for answers I had not yet given. He watched me closely, the way I flinched when Anthony entered the room, the way my voice faltered when Joseph asked me a question, the way I disappeared whenever Robert's laughter echoed in the hall. My father was no fool. Slowly, suspicion began to carve itself into his face. One evening, as twilight stretched across the kitchen, I sat quietly folding laundry. My brothers lingered nearby, their voices too light, their glances too smug. My father entered, his gaze sweeping the room. His eyes narrowed as he noticed the tension. He asked me gently to step outside with him. I followed, trembling, my hands cold. On the porch, beneath the fading orange glow of the setting sun, he turned to me. His voice was low but urgent. "Patty," he said, "something is wrong here. I know it. Look at me. Tell me the truth." The words swelled in my throat. For years they had pressed against my lips, desperate to escape, yet chained by fear. My heart pounded so hard I thought I might collapse. Tears stung my eyes, and finally, in a broken whisper, I said, "It's them." For a moment, he did not understand. "Who?" he pressed. "My brothers," I choked. "They hurt me." Silence fell between us, heavy and suffocating. My father's face shifted from confusion to disbelief to a fury I had never seen before. His fists clenched, his jaw tightened, and he turned toward the door with such force that I thought it might splinter beneath his hand. I grabbed his sleeve, crying out, "Please don't!" But it was too late. The silence had been shattered, and nothing could restore it. Inside, the house erupted. My father confronted Anthony first, his voice thundering like I had never heard. Accusations flew. Denials spat back with arrogance. Joseph tried to intervene, his words sharp, while Robert shrank into the corner, pale and trembling. My mother, drawn by the commotion, rushed in, her face pale. At first she demanded to know what was happening, and when the truth was spoken aloud, she turned her eyes on me, searching for cracks in my words. I will never forget her face in that moment. Instead of rushing to me, instead of holding me, she faltered, torn between disbelief and horror. My brothers shouted over one another, insisting I lied, that I had invented everything to gain attention. But my father's rage only grew. "Do not lie to me," he roared. His hand struck the table so hard the dishes rattled. "I see it in her eyes. I see it in how she lives. You will not deny this." The neighbors must have heard, for soon voices whispered outside, shadows gathered on the porch. My mother wept, clinging to her sons, torn apart by divided loyalties. My father, however, made no room for doubt. He grabbed the telephone, his voice shaking with fury as he called the police. That night is etched into me like a scar. Red and blue lights flashed against the windows. Voices of officers filled the air, and my brothers, once so smug, were led away in handcuffs. I stood frozen in the corner, unable to move, unable to believe that the truth had finally escaped. My mother sobbed uncontrollably, accusing my father of destroying the family. My father stood like stone, his hand gripping mine as though anchoring me to the earth. The days that followed blurred into endless questions, at the police station, at the courthouse, in whispered conversations with lawyers and doctors. I had to repeat my story more times than I can count, each retelling peeling away another layer of my fragile shield. Some believed me instantly, others looked at me with doubt, as though wondering if a young girl could invent such claims. Each doubtful glance pierced me, but I clung to my father's hand, to his unwavering belief that I spoke the truth. My mother remained conflicted. She visited my brothers in custody, tears streaking her cheeks, insisting to anyone who would listen that they were good boys who had made mistakes. Her eyes rarely met mine in those days, and when they did, the warmth I had once known was gone. It was as if she had chosen her side, and it was not mine. That rejection cut deeper than any wound my brothers had inflicted. The trial itself felt like standing exposed beneath a burning sun. I was questioned, doubted, cross-examined. My words trembled, my voice cracked, but I spoke. For the first time, I spoke. And though the process felt endless, though the courtroom felt hostile, the truth remained unshaken. My brothers were declared guilty. When the verdict was read, I felt no triumph, only a hollow ache. My family was broken beyond repair. My mother's. Sobs echoed through the courthouse. My father stood rigid beside me, and I, though freed from silence, felt the chains of sorrow wrap tighter still. That night, as I lay in my bed in a house now emptied of their voices, I realized the truth had set me free, but it had also left me standing in ruins. My childhood was gone, my family shattered, my innocence burned away. I did not yet know how to rebuild. I only knew that the silence was gone, and in its place was a raw wound that would take years to heal. Looking back now, I see that God's hand was present even then. It was not in the shouting or the flashing lights, but in the simple fact that truth had finally come to light. The silence had been broken, and though the cost was terrible, it was the first step toward healing. A step I could never have taken alone. When the courthouse doors closed behind us, I thought for a fleeting moment that I might finally breathe freely. The silence had been broken, the truth dragged into light, and my brothers no longer held power over me. But freedom, I soon learned, does not come so easily. The cost of truth was staggering, and its aftermath was unlike anything I had imagined. Our home was no longer a place of warmth or even routine. It became a battlefield of grief and blame. My mother wandered the rooms. Like a ghost, her eyes red from constant tears. She avoided me, as if the sight of her daughter was too much to bear, as if I were the one who had destroyed the family rather than the sons she defended. When she did speak, her words were sharp. Why did you have to say anything? Couldn't you have kept it to yourself? Each sentence was another wound, deeper than the last. My father tried to keep the household steady, but the weight of it broke him down. He carried himself like a man aged overnight, shoulders heavy, voice roughened by guilt. I overheard him late at night, muttering prayers through clenched teeth, asking God why he had not been home sooner, why he had failed to protect me. His love for me had not changed, but I could see how the burden consumed him, turning him hollow. For me, each day was filled with a strange mix of relief and sorrow. I no longer feared the sound of footsteps outside my bedroom door, but peace did not come. Instead, nightmares replaced the silence. I would wake in the middle of the night drenched in sweat, hearing their voices echo in my mind, reliving moments I wished I could forget. Even in their absence, they haunted me. And then the letters came. From jail, my brothers sent words meant to twist the knife further. One arrived folded neatly, the handwriting unmistakable. Inside, Anthony scrawled lines that accused me of betrayal, insisting I had ruined their lives. Joseph's words were colder, calculated, claiming that I had exaggerated everything, that I had destroyed our family for attention. Robert's letter was hesitant, almost sorrowful, but it still carried the sting of denial. Reading their words made me tremble. I burned the first letter in the fireplace, but the memory of it never left me. The town did not remain silent either. Whispers spread through the neighborhood, carried from porch to porch, pew to pew at church. Some neighbors looked at me with pity, others with suspicion. I felt eyes on me wherever I went, eyes that asked questions no one dared to speak aloud. I became that girl, the one whose family had imploded, the one marked by scandal. Even walking to the market became a trial, every step heavy under unseen judgment. At school, things were no easier. Rumors drifted through the hallways. Some classmates avoided me as though I carried something contagious. Others whispered cruel things, repeating lies they must have overheard from gossiping adults. I kept my head down, my notebooks filled with trembling handwriting, my voice seldom heard. Friends I once had disappeared one by one, unwilling to stand beside someone so stained by family shame. Inside our house, silence reigned, but it was not the silence I had once feared. This silence was heavier, darker, the silence of a family, fractured beyond repair. Meals were eaten without conversation. My mother rarely sat beside my father, and when she did, her eyes were downcast. I often ate quickly, escaping to my room, where I curled beneath the covers with a Bible clutched in my hands. I did not always understand the words I read, but I prayed over them anyway, desperate for meaning. One evening, my father found me, crying quietly in the corner. He sat down beside me, his hand resting gently on my shoulder. "Patty," he said softly, "you are not to blame. Do you hear me? You are not the one who ruined this family." His voice trembled, and I knew he was trying to convince himself as much as me. I nodded, though in my heart, guilt still pressed down like a stone. My mother, however, did not echo those words. Her grief twisted into bitterness, and that bitterness aimed itself at me. I overheard her telling a neighbor once, "If she had stayed quiet, none of this would have happened." Those words cut deeper than any insult. She could not, or would not, see that my silence had already cost me everything. Her refusal to believe left me feeling abandoned, even in my own home. The weight of it all drove me further inward. I avoided the market, avoided gatherings, avoided even the simplest pleasures I once enjoyed. Laughter felt impossible. Joy seemed unreachable. Nights were the worst, when the house creaked and shadows stretched across the walls. I pressed my hands to my ears as I had done as a child, but the memories still came, louder than ever. Looking back now, I realized those years after the trial were some of the loneliest of my life. The truth had freed me from silence, but it had also set me adrift in ruins. My family was broken, my reputation stained, my sense of safety destroyed. I had no idea then that healing was still possible, that God had not abandoned me even when I could not feel His presence. But at that time, all I saw was devastation. My father was consumed by guilt, my mother by denial, my brothers by anger, and I by shame. It seemed there was nothing left to hold us together. I often wondered if I had made the right choice, speaking the truth. I asked myself if silence might have been better after all. But deep down, I knew silence had been killing me, and that speaking had been the only way to survive. Even so, survival did not feel like living. It felt like existing in a world reduced to ashes. It would take years before light began to break through those ruins. Years before I found a new path, a new family, and a sanctuary I never expected. But at that moment, all I knew was loss. All I knew was the echo of a family that no longer existed, and the long, uncertain road that stretched before me. After the trial, after the shouting and the tears and the endless questions, it felt as though there was nothing left of the life I had once known. Our house no longer echoed with laughter or even arguments. It was simply heavy, quiet, broken. My father, desperate to give us a chance at starting over, made a decision that would change the course of my life. One morning, he announced that we were moving. The town that had whispered about us, the neighbors who had stared, the school, halls that had become a gauntlet of shame, we would leave them behind. I did not protest. In truth, I felt a small relief at the thought of escaping the streets where every corner reminded me of pain. Packing my few belongings into a suitcase, I wondered if distance might finally allow me to breathe. Yet when we arrived in a new town, the shadows of my past traveled with me. Trauma does not vanish with a change of scenery. It follows, like an echo you cannot silence. My new school was run by Catholic sisters, women in black habits whose presence filled the halls with an air of discipline and reverence. At first I feared them. Their voices were firm, their expectations high, and after all I had endured, authority no longer felt safe. I shrank in my seat, certain that if they looked too closely, they would see through me to the broken pieces I carried. But something unexpected happened. These women, though strict, also carried a kind of steadiness I had never known. They did not waste words, but when they spoke, their eyes met mine with a sincerity that startled me. Sister Margaret, my literature teacher, once paused after class, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You have a gift with words, Patricia," she said gently. "Do not hide it." I nearly wept at her kindness. It was the first time in years that an adult had spoken to me without suspicion or anger. The rhythm of Catholic school life gave me something I had long lacked: structure. Bells rang at precise times, prayers opened and closed the day, lessons unfolded with order. For a girl whose life had been chaos, that order was strangely comforting. Each morning, kneeling in chapel, I felt a quiet I had never experienced at home. It was not the silence of fear, but of reverence. The flicker of candles, the sound of voices reciting prayers together. It steadied me. At first, I did not know how to pray with the others. My own prayers had always been desperate cries whispered into darkness. But here, in the cadence of ancient words spoken by many voices, I found a strange kind of safety. I did not have to explain my pain. I could simply join the chorus, and for a few moments I was not alone. Friendship, too, found me slowly. A girl named Mary sat beside me one afternoon during lunch, offering half of her sandwich with an easy smile. "You always sit by yourself," she said. "You don't have to." Her kindness was simple, unforced, and it cracked open a part of me I had believed was sealed forever. For the first time since the storm of my brother's betrayal, I laughed softly, surprised at the sound of it. Still, healing was not instant. Nightmares followed me into our new home. My mother's coldness had not lessened. She barely spoke to me, her grief still chained to the sons she had lost. My father tried to hold our fractured family together, but I could see exhaustion weighing on him. Even so, the small pockets of kindness I encountered at school became lifelines. A smile from a classmate, a nod of approval from a teacher, the warmth of a candlelit chapel. Each was like a drop of water to parched ground. I remember one particular moment with piercing clarity. It was late autumn, leaves scattering across the courtyard, when Sister Catherine led us in, singing a hymn. The words spoke of refuge, of God as a shelter in times of storm. As the voices rose around me, something inside me broke, not with despair this time, but with release. Tears spilled down my cheeks, and for the first time, I did not hide them. Sister Catherine noticed, but said nothing, only placed a hymn book in my trembling hands and let me continue singing. In that moment, I felt as though God Himself had drawn me close, whispering that I was not abandoned. It would be a long journey still, full of setbacks and doubts. I did not yet know I would one day choose the life of a nun. But in those early days, the seeds were planted, seeds of trust, watered by the discipline and care of the sisters, seeds of faith nourished in the rhythm of prayer and ritual, seeds of hope, fragile but alive, growing quietly where despair had once ruled. Looking back now, I can see that this was the turning point. The storm had not ended, but the first rays of light pierced through. My family remained broken, my nights restless, my scars unhealed. Yet for the first time in years, I saw a path forward, and though I did not yet realize it, that path was leading me to the doorway of the church, a doorway that, in time, would open wide and welcome me into a new life. The years that followed my arrival at Catholic school were not easy, but they were different. For the first time in so long, I felt myself moving forward rather than simply surviving. The structure of each day, the kindness of a few teachers, the quiet strength of the sisters, these things began to knit threads of stability into the tattered fabric of my life. Slowly, very slowly, I began to believe that maybe I was not broken beyond repair. As I grew older, I poured myself into my studies. Books became both an escape and a guide. In the pages of literature, I discovered characters who suffered greatly, yet endured. In Scripture, I found words that seemed written just for me. Promises of refuge, of redemption, of love that does not falter. My notebooks filled with essays that carried more of my heart than my teachers ever realized. When Sister Margaret praised my writing, I felt something stir in me, a reminder that I was not defined solely by what had been taken from me. I still had gifts to offer, pieces of myself that could bring light into the world. Friendships, once impossible to imagine, began to grow. Mary remained by my side, patient with my silences, gently coaxing me into laughter. Through her, I met others who accepted me without question. At first, I kept my walls high, afraid that trust would only lead to betrayal. But little by little, I learned that not every smile hides cruelty, not every hand extended is meant to harm. The cracks in my heart did not vanish, but they no longer felt like proof that I was unworthy. College was the next step, something I had never dreamed possible in the darkest years of my childhood. My father, though burdened and weary, encouraged me to pursue it. "You've always been the strong one, Patty," he told me. "Don't stop now." His words carried me through moments of doubt, and so I enrolled at a small university not far from home. Those years brought new challenges, but they also brought freedom. For the first time, I lived away from the suffocating weight of my past. It was in those years that my faith deepened in a way I could not have predicted. I attended Mass not because it was required, but because my soul craved it. Kneeling in the quiet of the chapel, I felt something I had not felt even in the supportive walls of my school, a personal, undeniable presence of God. There were moments when I would sit alone after the service ended, the candles still flickering, and I felt as though Christ Himself were near, whispering into the broken places of my heart. You are mine. You are not forgotten. That whisper became a lifeline. Whenever memories returned, whenever nightmares pulled me back to those long nights of fear, I turned to prayer. Instead of begging for escape, I began to pray for strength. Instead of asking why, I began to ask how I could use my pain to help others. Slowly, the question shifted from why me to what now, and that change made all the difference. One evening, during my final year at university, I attended a retreat, hosted by the sisters who had once taught me. We gathered in a quiet monastery, surrounded by fields that stretched far and wide. There, during a night of silent prayer, I felt something profound. As I gazed at the crucifix, I realized that Christ, too, had been betrayed, abandoned, and wounded by those closest to him. And yet, he had chosen not hatred, but love. In that moment, I knew that my path was no longer one of fear, but of service. The decision did not come with thunder or lightning. It was not dramatic. It was a quiet knowing, as gentle and certain as the dawn. I felt God calling me to give my life, not because I wished to escape my past, but because I wished to transform it. My pain, I realized, could either chain me forever or become the very offering I laid at his feet. Choosing the church meant choosing to love where I had once known only betrayal. It meant choosing faith over fear. When I told my father, he listened quietly, his eyes moist with pride and sorrow. "If this is what brings you peace, Patty," he said softly, "then it is the right path." My mother, by then, barely spoke to me. Her bitterness lingered, and I knew I could not change her heart. But for the first time, I did not feel crushed by her rejection. I understood that her wounds were her own, and I could no longer carry them for her. Entering the convent was not a flight from the world, but a step toward it. I knew the vows would be difficult, that the life would be demanding, but I also knew that within its walls I had found something my family had denied me: unconditional belonging. The sisters who welcomed me did not see a victim. They saw a woman, willing to serve, to pray, to offer her life for others. They saw, perhaps more clearly than I did at the time, that my scars could become a source of strength. Looking back now, I realize that this was the true turning point of my story. The years of silence, the courtroom battles, the ruins of family, they had all led me to this choice. I could have allowed bitterness to consume me. I could have hidden forever, defined only by what was taken. Instead, I chose faith. I chose to believe that my suffering could be redeemed. I chose to believe that God could make beauty from ashes, and so when I walked through the doors of the convent for the first time, I did not feel like I was leaving the world behind. I felt like I was stepping into the life I had been meant to live all along. Now, as I sit within the quiet walls of this convent, the years behind me stretch like a long road, filled with both shadows and light. I have lived through betrayal, silence, exposure, and loss. I have also lived through renewal, healing, and a calling that gave me new life. Time has softened some memories, but it has not erased them. The scars remain, etched deep within me, yet they no longer define me as wounds. They are reminders, reminders of what I survived, and reminders of the grace that carried me through. There are mornings when I walk into the chapel before dawn, the air still heavy with silence, and I light a single candle. As its flame flickers against the stained glass windows, I remember the girl I once was. I see her in my mind, thin, frightened, voiceless. I whisper to her, "You survived. You are loved. You are not alone anymore." And in those moments I feel the presence of God filling the space, assuring me that He had never left me, even in the darkest nights when I thought I had been abandoned. My name is Sister Patricia Alden, and this is the life I have chosen. When I first walked through the convent doors, I feared I was leaving the world behind. In truth, I was stepping into the world more fully than ever before. Here, I found a new family, sisters who embraced me not for my past, but for my willingness to serve. Here, I discovered that my voice, once stolen by fear, could be used in prayer, in teaching, in comforting others who carry their own hidden wounds. It is true that my earthly family broke apart. My mother never truly forgave me for speaking the truth. My brothers lived out their punishments, each in their own way refusing to accept responsibility. My father carried guilt until his final days, though I tried to assure him that his love had been my anchor. Those losses will always ache, but I also know now that family is not only bound by blood. Family can be found in the hands that hold, yours when you weep, in the voices that pray with you when you are weary, in the hearts that choose to love you when others turn away. I often speak with young women who come to the convent seeking guidance. Some carry visible scars, others carry hidden ones, like mine once were. To them I say, your pain is not the end of your story. What was meant to break you does not have the power to define you forever. You can choose what to do with the ashes of your past. You can choose to build something new. Do I still remember the nights of terror? Yes. Do I still feel the sting of my mother's rejection? Yes, healing does not mean forgetting. Healing means the pain no longer controls you. It means being able to speak without trembling, to stand without fear, to live without shame. It means reclaiming the dignity that others tried to take. When I kneel in prayer today, I do not ask God to erase my history. I ask Him to use it. I ask Him to let my story be a light for someone else lost in darkness. If even one soul hears my testimony and finds the courage to speak, to seek help, to hold on for another day, then the suffering I endured has not been in vain. There is a verse that has carried me all these years. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Those words are the truth of my life. Darkness tried to consume me, through betrayal, through silence, through rejection. But it did not win. The light of God, the light of resilience, the light of truth overcame it. And that light is what I now share as a woman of faith, as a survivor, as a servant of Christ. To anyone listening, anyone who has known the weight of secrets or the chains of silence, you are not alone. There is hope, even when you cannot see it. There is love, even when you feel abandoned. And there is healing, even when your heart feels shattered beyond repair. I am living proof. My story is not simply one of tragedy. It is one of endurance, of transformation, of grace. Though my family turned against me, I found another family waiting. Though the doors of my home closed in betrayal, the doors of the church opened in welcome. And it was through those doors that I found the life I was always meant to live. Now, as the bells ring across the courtyard and the voices of my sisters rise in prayer, I know I am exactly where I belong. I have turned pain into purpose, fear into faith, silence into testimony. And though the road was long and hard, I am grateful for the God who sustained me, for the church that embraced me, and for the chance to stand here today and say with certainty, I survived, I healed, and I chose love.